so we'll move on to the next question. Which architect and ideologies have you been drawn to? And could you also mention some of your favorite architectural trends from the pre-modernistic era?
From what I said before, literally, I'm attracted to everything. That is exactly what my architecture or my thought process is about. I'm attracted by Baroque architecture. I'm attracted by Gothic architecture. I'm extremely attracted to, I mean, of course, the modernistic architecture is the closest one to us. So it's from 1930 to literally, and then postmodern, so modern, postmodern. And we're still, I have a lot of discussions with my colleagues because they say we're not in the middle of postmodernism. I say, that's what you think. I think we're still in the middle of postmodernism because we're still mixing and matching. We're still trying to refine, and we're still learning from all these masters. Is it Le Corbusier, who built wonderful buildings in India, Chandigarh, and so on. We're still learning from those masters, and so I say maybe in a different way, maybe in a more refined way. Because when people think of postmodernism, they always think of maybe Ettore Sozza's Memphis design, this very, black and white, very, very strong colors, very neon kind of surfaces, and very harsh geometric kind of architecture and design. But if you think about it, even, approaching a project by 90 degrees angles sort of is, taking from Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and sort of bringing it into a contemporary language that's very sounds to me very postmodern. Even though, of course, when people talk about postmodernism and search it out in books and so on and so forth, it starts in the 80s and it ends in sort of in the 80s. But then what is the era after the 80s, the 90s? What about the 90s? What about us? I mean, we're children of let's say the modernism, the postmodernism. We're children of that. So I tend to define us as postmodernists just as well, because we haven't had, or we don't have a very defined architecture, and that is probably better so, because otherwise. What happened with deconstructivism, for instance? With deconstructivism, everyone was thinking in, let's say, late 90s, 2000 something, with Zaha Hadid, with Peter Eisenman, and all the Americans, Philip Johnson, for instance, even Rem Koolhaas was thrown into the package of the 10 deconstructivists. They made a huge exhibition in New York. And so they thought, we got now the language that is good again. We have found something that is entirely new. And there were some critics like Bruno Zevi, who was one of the greatest Italian theorists in architecture. He's not with us anymore. He's very old, but he was already thinking, does this deconstructivism, even though, they were trying to grasp all kinds of philosophical thinking, but it was like an overstructure. And he was already thinking, I've seen that stuff already in the 1920s, in the 1930s, and it was called expressionism. And in fact, deconstructivism at some point, and in fact also Zaha Hadid, was rather talking about her expressionist influences that came in, futurism and all that. So again, we were again in some sort of postmodern talk that they were grasping something that was already there. It was not an entirely new language, and I'm very happy that doesn't happen anymore, or not right away. Because when people think of an utopia, I'm always a bit scared when it looks like Star Trek and Star Wars, and it gets this kind of spacecraft. When architecture sort of seem more like a spacecraft than architecture, they lose a bit their aesthetical appeal, but as well also their social role. So it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, but bigger doesn't necessarily mean better.
Better, yeah.
And so I think in architecture, when things are more thought out, are more intellectually developed, I think that is better. Okay, there is more thought. There's a thought process that brings you to work with a context, a historical context, or maybe in America it's very difficult to find a historical context, so it's more maybe a geographical context or a social context, or there's something to relate to. And when architecture does that, I think that is the way where architecture becomes also more interesting. If it's just a cathedral, the glass cathedral in the middle of the desert, I'm kind of always worried. Like literally you could place these gimmick architectures wherever you want, and they would work or not work. It could be a shopping mall, it could be, I don't know, something, a spacecraft, as I said before. So I'm a bit worried that it's not well thought out and not very refined. So when architecture really responds to what you call context, any kind of context, already is a more sensible architecture. Okay, if you think, for instance, I was making the example before Chandigarh. Okay, you come as an architect, what do you do? I mean, if literally Zahadid would build right next to Le Corbusier, what would she do? She would do Zahadid. She would make her signature.
Yeah.
Okay. So I wouldn't be very happy to have like a Zahadid signature, because of course she has she had. I mean, she's also passed away. But I mean, we could let's use another example. Mad Architecture, who's like this huge studio from China, does amazing job. But of course, it's one of those studios that has a very strong signature, but it's a signature. It's interiorized. It's not a signature sort of like the one maybe Rem Koolhaas has. Rem Koolhaas is one who reacts very strongly to a context, and he showed that, for instance, in the project in the Fondazione Prada in Milan. So he would build inside an industrial context and sort of push the modernist architecture very close to the historical architecture, but never touch it, sort of. And I think that is a tension, that literally you can grasp it. Literally you can feel the tension that Rem Koolhaas wanted to achieve with the architecture. So, of course, I mean, I'm rather, team Koolhaas than team Zahadid. You probably got that, but it's also on an objective level. It's not about Koolhaas. It's about what he stands for, and what he stands for is to researching a lot and a lot and a lot, and to then use your research not to build the cathedral in the middle of nowhere, but to use that research and to be sensible enough to insert yourself or insert your architecture and your project within a context. So that is, I think, what should happen. So I didn't actually answer your question with this, but I think I did it in the beginning, saying that of course I'm nurturing myself and my research, and the architects that work for me do exactly the same. They nurture themselves with the lessons of literally every epoch. Every era is interesting, so there is no. Of course, I'm a big fan of Gothic architecture rather than Romantic architecture, because it's so tall and has this absolutely crazy proportions. But at the same time, I'm like fighting myself, and I'm like, I cannot leave Romantic architecture just behind, because it's so, it's like almost like a block architecture. Everything is made of stone, very small windows, but there's something there as well. So there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of something that you can grasp from that architecture as well. Even though, of course, I mean, for me, Gothic architecture rules over Romantic art because it is a development and so on and so forth. So
yeah, the attention to detail matters.
Sorry?
The attention to detail matters.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. You can never go wrong with that. I mean, Mies van der Rohe really was right about that. Not necessarily less is more, but God is in the detail.
Yeah,
I would say less is more. I think we're a bit over that lecture. It is important as a student, I think, to have sort of a wide canvas, and you really try to only put those lines that make sense. So to start right away with like a lot of curves and a lot of which are out of control usually. That's what I say my students when I see those projects and you're like, you know, arbitrarily designing curves. When I always tend to I quote a lot, as you can see, but Le Corbusier said that when he was finally able to do the one right curve, he understood finally architecture. And he learned that curve. Actually, he doesn't tell that, or he didn't tell that story many times. He learned it from Oscar Niemeyer, because Oscar Niemeyer actually was the one that, you know, lived for curves, but he had to sort of rationalize, and he learned from Le Corbusier. So the two together, they were like on fire, like literally. Architecturally, there was you would never have Ronchamp without Oscar Niemeyer, and you would never have Brasilia without Le Corbusier. And